you want the truth. Avoidants aren't cold, they're terrified. Not of you, of what you trigger in them. But here's the secret most people will never understand. The same part of them that runs can be trained to chase. And when you learn these 7 psychological triggers, they won't just come closer. They won't be able to stay away. Avoidants aren't afraid of love. They're afraid of what love exposes. Deep inside, they crave connection just like everyone else. But for them, connection has always been linked with danger, rejection, engulfment, abandonment, losing themselves. So what do? They build emotional walls, mask their fears with distance, and confuse independence with isolation. And here's the trap most people fall into. You try to break through their walls with more intensity, more affection, more closeness. But the harder you push, the harder they pull away. Not because they don't care, but because their nervous system perceives closeness as a threat. Now here's the paradox. The moment you stop chasing and start creating emotional safety, everything begins to shift. Emotional safety isn't about making grand romantic gestures or constantly affirming them. It's about creating a space where they don't feel like they're being cornered. It's your calm presence, your regulated energy, your ability to hold your own emotional state without needing them to fill it. That's what earns their trust. Not because you're giving them what they want, but because you're giving them what they never got. Space to be themselves without pressure to perform emotionally. You don't interrogate their feelings. You don't demand constant communication. You don't spiral when they pull back. Instead, you stay centered, grounded. You hold the energy of, I'm here, but I'm not here to fix or force you. That presence speaks louder than 1,000 I love yous. Because for the avoidant, true obsession starts where they feel safe enough to stay. Your consistency becomes the anchor they never had. You don't have to play games. You just become someone they can finally relax around. Someone whose energy isn't trying to control or consume them. Someone who lets them breathe. And when they finally realize they don't have to defend themselves around you, their armor cracks. The obsession doesn't come from you trying to be perfect. It comes from how they feel about themselves when they're around you. Safe, seen, unpressured, accepted. Running never works. You become the calm in the storm they've lived with for years, the stillness they didn't even know they were craving. And once that happens, they don't just want you. They start to need the peace only you bring. Avoidants are wired to protect themselves from emotional overwhelm. And here's what most people get wrong. They confuse love with constant closeness. They think the more open and available they are, the more love they'll receive in return. But with avoidance, that strategy backfires. Because what draws them in isn't full access. It's mystery. It's the feeling that there's always something more to learn about you. Something they haven't quite figured out yet. The minute you become fully known, overly transparent, or emotionally predictable, their nervous system shuts down. Not because you did something wrong, but because the chase is gone. The puzzle is solved. And they begin to disconnect. Not because you're not valuable, but because the thrill of discovery disappeared. Avoidants are deeply curious creatures. Their minds are always scanning for what they can't control, what they can't fully possess. That's why mystery is magnetic to them. When you stop revealing every emotion, every thought, every fear, when you hold some things back and keep a part of yourself sacred, that's when their attention sharpens. You don't owe anyone full emotional disclosure on day one. When you strategically keep a sense of independence, when you can enjoy silence without rushing to fill it, when you leave some questions unanswered, you're creating a subtle tension. That tension pulls them in. Most people misunderstand this and think mystery means playing games. It doesn't. Mystery isn't about manipulation. It's about mastery. It's about being so in tune with your own value that you no longer need to overshare to be loved. You no longer need to constantly explain yourself, prove your intentions, or justify your feelings. You let people discover you layer by layer, not because you're hiding anything, but because depth takes time to reveal. And avoidants become obsessed with that kind of depth, the kind they can't access in one sitting, the kind they have to earn. This mystery keeps their mind activated. Their thoughts loop around you. What are you thinking? What do you feel? Why do you seem so calm, so complete, even without them? That unknown becomes irresistible. You don't chase them with words. You haunt them with presence, with stillness, with the quiet power of someone who's not trying to be decoded, but who knows they're worth discovering. And in that gap between what they know and what they don't know about you, their obsession is born. There's something undeniably captivating about what we can't fully grasp. For the avoidant, this isn't just a preference. It's a pattern deeply rooted in their emotional wiring. The unknown feels safer than the known. Certainty often triggers suffocation, and too much emotional transparency can feel like losing control. So when someone shows up and reveals everything too quickly, every emotion, every insecurity, every detail, it might feel like intimacy to you, but to an avoidant, it feels like being backed into a corner. They retreat, they pull away, not because they don't care, but because their nervous system is screaming for space. But when you learn to embody mystery, not manipulation, not game playing, but genuine emotional self-control, you unlock one of the deepest triggers for attraction in the avoidant mind. Mystery isn't about hiding who you are. It's about honoring your layers. It's about understanding that the most powerful people in the room are the ones who don't feel the need to be fully understood right away. When you don't never rush to fill every silence, when you can sit comfortably with your own thoughts, when you can allow questions to linger without immediately giving answers, you become magnetic. You stand out in a world obsessed with oversharing. You send the message that your attention is earned, not freely handed out. And to the avoidant who's used to people trying to fix them with love, this is new. This is intriguing. This is unforgettable. Avoidants become mentally addicted to the people they can't quite figure out. It triggers their curiosity, their desire to pursue. They begin scanning for your patterns, trying to decode your silences, wondering what you're feeling when you don't say much. And every time they think they've figured you out, you show a new layer. Run away, new perspective, a new strength. It keeps them mentally invested, emotionally activated. You don't have to perform. You just have to own the fact that you're not an open book. You are a whole world. And not every chapter is available on the first read. In a world of people trying to be liked, trying to be seen, trying to be chosen, you become the exception. You let yourself be discovered. And that is the kind of energy the avoidant can't forget. Not because you're loud, but because your silence speaks in riddles. Running away never works, and they won't stop thinking about you until they solve the puzzle, and even then, they'll still come back for more. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have when dealing with an avoidant is the belief that love means constant availability, being there all the time, always responding, always showing up first. But here's the truth. What is always available often becomes invisible. Avoidants may struggle with intimacy, but they are incredibly sensitive to value. And the fastest way to lose that perceived value is by making yourself too easy to access, too easy to reach, too easy to get. You become familiar, predictable. And in the avoidant psyche, familiarity often breeds discomfort, not security. They are drawn to what feels slightly out of reach, not impossible, but earned. The more you pull back your energy with grace, the more they begin to lean in. Not because you're playing games, but because you're showing restraint. You're showing self-respect. You're showing that your time, your attention, and your emotional energy are sacred, and not everyone gets unlimited access. When you stop being instantly available, when you stop always being the one to initiate, to explain, to repair, you interrupt the avoidance pattern. You send a different signal, one that says, I don't chase, I attract. This creates an emotional friction inside them. On one hand, they're used to people making them the center. On the other hand, here you are. Present, but not needy. Interested, but not desperate. That subtle distance makes them question, wonder, obsess. Why aren't they chasing me? Why aren't they breaking? That internal conflict becomes a form of emotional gravity. And suddenly, running away works. You're not just someone they care about. You're someone whose validation now matters, whose energy they start to seek out, because you've flipped the dynamic without ever raising your voice. Avoidants are often running from the loss of control. But when you become slightly unavailable, not rude, not cold, but calm and self-contained, you take the emotional power back. You're no longer at the mercy of their push-pull behavior. You're no longer on standby. You've communicated without a single word that you value yourself too much to wait at a closed door. And that energy, that's what they remember. That's what keeps them checking your stories, rereading your messages, replaying your words. You became the one thing they didn't expect. Unavailable just enough to be unforgettable. The most misunderstood form of power in relationships is emotional detachment. Not coldness, not indifference, but the calm, grounded energy of someone who knows their worth so deeply that they're not swayed by rejection, silence, or unpredictability. Running away never works. This kind of detachment doesn't scream, it doesn't chase, and it doesn't try to fix what isn't ready to be healed. And when you embody this kind of presence with an avoidant, something begins to shift. They notice. Because most people, especially when emotionally invested, become reactive. They beg, they overexplain, they spiral when things feel uncertain. But when you lead with dignity, when you remain emotionally centered even when the avoidant pulls away, you become the exception. You become the one they can't categorize. Avoidants, running neverwardants often interpret intense emotional expression as pressure, not because you're doing something wrong, but because their system is wired to associate closeness with loss of freedom. So when you detach, not to punish them, but to protect your peace, you send a signal they're not used to receiving. You're saying, I care, but I don't collapse. I feel, but I don't fall apart. That message carries weight because it shows maturity. It shows emotional mastery. And that kind of energy isn't attractive. It's disarming. They may not say it out loud, but avoidants pay attention to who stays regulated under pressure. They watch to see who loses control when they create distance. And when you remain steady, when you don't flinch, don't lash out, don't over-pursue, they begin to feel something they didn't expect: safety. You become someone who doesn't try to invade their inner world, but who also doesn't shrink in response to their avoidance. That balance of strength and serenity, that's where obsession starts to grow. You see, the avoid never works. The avoidant isn't looking for someone to chase them. Deep down, they're longing for someone whose self-respect mirrors what they've been missing inside. Someone who doesn't need to force closeness, but who inspires it by the sheer power of their presence. When you walk away from disrespect, when you don't react to silence, when you don't plead for connection, you're no longer just a romantic option. You become a standard. And that's what keeps you living in their mind long after you've gone silent. It's not the emotion that stays with them. It's the emotional control. That's what they remember. That's what haunts them. That's what pulls them back. Avoidants are hypersensitive to pressure. Emotional, verbal, or energetic. So the moment they feel someone to rush their pace, decode them too quickly, or pull them deeper before they're ready, their walls go up. And it's not personal. It's protective. The key to unlocking their connection is to stop trying to lead with emotional speed and instead match their rhythm. Meet them where they are, not where you wish they would be. If they lean out, you take a breath and lean back. If they take a step forward, you step forward too. But never faster, never heavier. That's how you build trust with someone who equates closeness with loss of control. You become attuned, not intrusive. Most people make the mistake of pushing for clarity too soon, asking questions that feel invasive, demanding consistency before it's earned. The avoidant withdraws, not because they don't care, but because they feel emotionally ambushed. But when you learn to mirror their energy, not in a passive-aggressive way, but from a place of self-respect, you disrupt the entire pattern. You stop feeding their fear that intimacy equals suffocation. And instead, you show them that connection can be gradual, balanced, and non-threatening. That's when their nervous system starts to relax. Now here's where the magic happens is, once you've mirrored their pace long enough for them to feel safe, you begin to shift the rhythm. Slowly, subtly, you set a higher emotional standard, not with demands, but with example. You show them how healthy intimacy looks, how it feels. You guide without forcing. You love without losing yourself. And that contrast, the difference between what they're used to and what you're offering, awakens something new in them. Curiosity, admiration, longing. They're not used to someone being both emotionally available and emotionally contained. But that's exactly who you become when you master this dynamic. You move and never works. You awareness, not desperation. You respond instead of react. You don't manipulate, you lead, not by pulling them toward you, but by walking at a steady pace beside them and showing them step by step what safe connection feels like. Eventually, they start to match your energy. Your emotional maturity becomes magnetic, your patience rare, and your inner peace addictive, because you didn't try to control them. You simply showed them a rhythm they never knew they needed until it became the only one they could feel safe dancing to. Avoidants aren't afraid of love. They're afraid of the chaos they believe love brings. They've learned somewhere along the way that closeness means emotional instability, arguments, pressure, expectations, drama. And so when they sense reactivity, they start to shut down. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they feel too much, too fast, and their defense mechanism is to disconnect. This is where most people get caught. They try to connect by expressing every emotion in real time, thinking transparency equals intimacy. But avoidants don't hear truth in emotional outbursts. They hear danger, they see a red flag, and they pull away, not because they don't care, but because their survival instinct tells them to run from intensity. But when you show up with emotional mastery, not suppression, but self-command, you shift the entire experience. You show them that emotion doesn't have to mean volatility. That love doesn't have to look like chaos. When you can feel deeply and still speak calmly, when you can be disappointed and still remain composed, when you can express your truth without turning it into a battle, you create a kind of emotional safety they didn't even know they craved. They start to trust you, not just with their time, but with their vulnerability, because they realize you're not going to explode when they need space. You're not going to fall apart if they need time to process. You're not going to beg, chase, or plead. You're grounded. You're centered. And that's a rare experience for someone who's used to being emotionally cornered. Your self-regulation becomes a mirror to them. It shows them what's possible. It shows them they don't have to run to feel safe. They can stay. And in that staying, something happens. They begin to admire you, respect you, not just because you're kind or loving, but because you're stable. You hold your emotional center no matter how the winds shift. And that stability is intoxicating to someone who's never had it modeled before. It's not your words that draw them in. It's your ability to remain calm in moments where others would collapse. That emotional poise becomes unforgettable. Because to the avoidant, you're not just another person trying to love them. You're someone who has mastered the very thing they fear most. Intimacy without chaos never works. And that's what makes them come back. That's what makes them think about you long after the messages stop, because what they felt in your presence wasn't pressuring, it was peace. There's a moment, quiet, powerful, irreversible, when your energy shifts, when you finally realize that loving someone doesn't mean tolerating emotional breadcrumbs. When you stop waiting, stop hoping, stop trying to convince them of your worth. That moment when you walk away and mean it, not in anger, not in spite, but from deep self-respect, is the moment everything changes. For them, for you, and especially for the avoidant who thought you would always be there. Avoidants are used to people staying while being mistreated, staying while confused, staying while begging for clarity that never comes. They've built an entire emotional world where distance equals power. But when you reclaim your energy, when you finally stop responding, when your silence becomes louder than any words you've ever said, they feel it. Not immediately, maybe, not all at once, but they do. The energy shifts. And suddenly they're not the ones walking away, you are. And not because you don't care, but because you finally care about yourself more. You see, true obsession doesn't begin when someone is being chased. It begins when they feel the absence of what they took for granted. When the space they once filled with your voice, your attention, your loyalty is now just silence. And in that silence, they start to feel things they've spent years avoiding. Regret, reflection, longing. Because the person who once bent for them, who once softened every edge just to stay close, is now gone. Not angrily, not dramatically, but completely. You didn't slam the door. You just stopped waiting by it. That's the trigger avoidants never see coming. Because they expect your emotions to overpower you. They expect the tears, the pleading, the need for closure. But when you leave quietly with your dignity intact, it pierces through their defenses in a way nothing else can. They start replaying everything, reconstructing every moment, wondering how they lost someone who wasn't trying to own them, but who offered them peace. Someone never works. Someone who didn't just want their time, but wanted connection, genuine, lasting human connection. And now that it's gone, they can't unfeel it. You walking away isn't just an ending. It's the awakening. And often it's only in your absence that they finally recognize your presence, not as noise, as running away never works, but as the calm they'll keep searching for in every room you're no longer in. Now that you've seen the truth behind these 7 triggers, you understand something most people never will. Avoidants don't fall for pressure, noise, or emotional chaos. They fall for depth, for stability, for emotional safety that doesn't suffocate them. You don't attract them by trying to fix them, heal them, or prove your love. You attract them when you stop trying to win them at all. When your energy becomes so grounded, so self-respecting, so magnetic that they begin to crave what you're no longer handing out freely. That's not manipulation. It's transformation. And it starts with you becoming the version of yourself that no longer needs to chase, explain, or beg to be understood. Every trigger you've just heard is rooted in inner strength, not strategy, not surface-level tactics, but true emotional mastery. The kind that holds space without collapsing. The kind that can care deeply and still walk away if the energy is no longer being matched. Because ultimately, it's not about making an avoidant obsessed with you. It's about becoming someone who values themselves so completely that you naturally activate desire, respect, and emotional investment. When you align with that level of self-worth, the avoidant no longer sees you as a threat. They begin to see you as the one thing they never knew they needed, but now can't stop thinking about. This is the paradox they never saw coming. You stopped chasing, and that's when they started noticing. You stopped proving, and that's when they started remembering. You became scarce. Not because you disappeared, but because you became selective. Your attention became a privilege, not a given. And that shift in dynamic is what wakes the avoidant up. Not to the idea of love, but to the experience of it. Healthy, grounded, liberating love. The kind that doesn't trap them, but elevates them. That doesn't demand, but inspires. That doesn't need constant reassurance, because it radiates from a place of wholeness. So, if you take anything from this, let it be this truth on: the real obsession doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from letting go of anything that makes you shrink. When you become the safe space they can't find anywhere else. Strong, calm, mysterious, emotionally free, you don't just leave a mark. You leave a void. One they'll feel in your absence. One they'll want to fill not with distance, but with closeness. And by the time they realize what they had, you already have become someone who no longer needs them to recognize it. Because you'll have already recognized yourself. Thank you for watching this video all the way through. If something inside you shifted, if a truth hit home, or if a light bulb went off in your heart, then this message reached the right place. Remember, you are not here to chase love. You are here to become the kind of love that doesn't have to beg, perform, or plead to be chosen. You are powerful beyond your patterns, and the way you show up, calm, clear, grounded, can change everything. If this message helped you see avoidant behavior from a new lens or gave you the strength to reclaim your energy, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and drop a comment below. I read every one of them. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss a video that speaks directly to your soul. We're building a community here, one based on truth, emotional healing, and powerful transformation. And every time you choose your self-worth over fear, you help others do the same. You're not just watching a video, you're becoming part of a movement. Until next time, stay strong, stay rooted, and never forget, you are not hard to love. You've just outgrown who can't meet you there. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next video.